Sit down if you would be so kind and turn and face us. Deputy Ham be sworn as a witness.
Raise your hand. You swear in front of the testimony you're about to get a sword of the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so you got.
I do.
You may be seated. Can you state your first and last name with spelling of both, please?
David Quinn, David Quinn.
And good afternoon. How are you employed?
I'm retired.
What are you retired from?
The Atlanta Police Department.
And how long have you been retired from the Atlanta Police Department?
Fully since 2019.
Okay. And when you say fully, what does that mean?
So I joined the Atlanta Police Department in 1985 when I was 20 years old, and I stayed until 2019. So I did 33 years and some change. After that, I got into the true crime TV business, which is what I do now.
And tell the jury a little bit about your time with the Atlanta Police Department over those 33 years.
Again, I hit the street when I was about 21 years old, 1986, after having been hired at 20. And I went straight to Zone 3. I don't know, Zone 3 was back in those days, Southeast, Southwest Atlanta. I stayed there 10 years in probably the highest crime district in the city at that time. After those 10 years, I don't know why, somebody sent me to Bankhead, and I went to the Zone 1 precinct, and I worked there for another 5. In my 15th year, after working those high crime areas, somebody promoted me to detective, and they sent me straight to homicide, which sent me right back to those same neighborhoods in Zone 3 and Zone 1. It's like going home. So.
And let's talk about your 10 years being in Zone 3. Did you have the occasion to patrol the entire Zone 3, or were you assigned to a particular section of Zone 3?
Well, I was assigned Zone 3 A sector, which was that area around McDaniel Glen Housing Project, the Pittsburgh Civic League Apartments, Pryor Road, but there was a lot of bleed over. In other words, I wouldn't just work one specific area in downtown Atlanta. I would also branch out as far as Gilbert Road, which is at the county line to Clayton County. So it was the busiest precinct at the time, so you kind of scattered all over.
Okay. And you said it briefly, as a homicide detective, did you unfortunately have the occasion to investigate homicides within the Zone 3 neighborhood?
Absolutely, every month, usually.
And based on your time in Zone 3, if you could describe the Zone 3 community for this jury.
Zone 3 in community, from the time that I worked it in the mid-'80s, all the way until I was an old man in, the mid-2000s. It's a rough, busy neighborhood, but there are pockets of diversity everywhere. You may have truck drivers, you have doctors, lawyers, but you also have the quote-unquote marginalized communities that are also in Zone 3. So it's a mix. It's not one thing.
And based on your interaction of having different type of community members within Zone 3, how would you describe the residents of Zone 3?
The who?
The residents.
The residents are hardworking people. I grew up out there with them. I feel like, I am Zone 3 because I saw so many different generations get raised up out there. And I feel like I was only 12, I was a boy. When I left, I was a grandfather. So that was my life.
Now, I'm going to take you back to your time as a detective in the homicide unit. If you could tell the jury, what were your primary job duties and responsibilities?
When I went to homicide, I learned quickly that my responsibility was to investigate crimes that involved deaths at the hands of other humans. I had worked murder. That's primarily what I worked. I worked with about 18 other detectives, and we were in a rotation, whereas you would catch a homicide, respond to it. You'd have about a month to work that case up. And once you've worked that case up, you would go down to the bottom of that homicide list. But they were giving us the responsibility to actually handle cases that involve special investigations. In particular, police officers' use of force, shooting people, anyone that dies in custody. We handle those investigations. And sometimes we even handle corruption investigations on the department if, in fact, there was some kind of conflict in internal affairs.
So speaking specifically about having to do those special investigations, specifically the officer-involved investigations, what were your job duties and responsibilities for those type of investigations?
Well, I had to investigate whether or not an officer had the legal authority to use his gun in a deadly way. I investigated deadly force.
And to your knowledge, is that responsibility of investigating officer-involved shootings still the responsibility of the homicide unit?
You know, when I was on the way out, it changed gears. They decided to let the Georgia Bureau of Investigation handle those shootings. I guess they didn't want the actual agency to investigate itself.
Somebody say something?
I did, Your Honor. I said objection, speculation.
I'll overrule the objection.
When you are assigned as when you are assigned an officer-involved shooting, if there is an underlying crime that occurred before the officer-involved shooting, do you investigate both the underlying crime and the officer-involved shooting, or do you are those two separate investigations?
No, you have to work both. You've got to understand the reason why the officer was there in the first place, why he pulled his gun, why he used deadly force. Sometimes it's not involving a weapon. Sometimes it's physical force. So you must also investigate that crime as well.
Now, in your experience as an investigator, do all investigators investigate cases the same way?
Oh, no. It's just like any other walk of life. I mean, everyone has their own style. And usually your style comes from how you carry yourself in the street and your experience out there with the citizens, in this case, the citizens of Fulton County, City of Atlanta.
Tell us a little bit about your investigative style.
Everybody calls me old school.
I'll overrule the objection, Mr. Steele.
I am Atlanta, and I feel like every case I work is a story, and I've got to report back, the information from that story. I always say when I work my investigations, I want to have on a belt and suspenders. I want to make sure I got everything. And sometimes, commanders and supervisors don't like that. I mean, I take my time, slow and methodical with how I work my cases. I don't move very fast.
Faces. I overrule the objection, Mr. Sharp.
Thank you.
You could say.
That's pretty much it. I just try to keep, you don't get all the answers when you work in investigations like they do on TV, but what you do is you try to get as much as you can, and you miss things. I miss things on every investigation. And so you have to take your time to make sure you have it right.
When you're conducting an investigation, generally, what type of evidence are you looking for, say for your homicide cases? What type of evidence do you want, are you trying to gather as a part of your investigation?
I mean, first and foremost, I want eyewitnesses. I want humans to give information that could lead to some kind of inroads in closing this case. As I got older in the department, technology became a useful tool. We've always had fingerprints. You want fingerprints. DNA became a really big deal around 2002. I've watched everything change, but I always, with any kind of testimony that I receive from a witness, I want to get something to back it up, something tangible that'll vouch for this person that's an eyewitness seeing something. But I really like eyewitness evidence. A lot of people don't, but I do, because the community, that is the witness.
Now, in your time as a homicide detective, have you had the occasion to interview suspects?
Absolutely.
And tell the jury a little bit about your interview style.
I try to keep my interviews.
Objection, relevance.
Overrule, Mr. Sharp. Have a seat.
I try to have conversations. I mean, from these conversations, I try to have them make sense. I don't want it to be overbearing. Sometimes those conversations, those interviews can get heated, but you want to build some kind of rapport with the person, whether it be a witness or a suspect, and make sure you're getting good information.
Do you have an objection, Mr. Steele? What's the basis? All right, come on up.